Hi math class, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to another lesson. In today's class, we're going to be looking at lesson 73, and we're going to focus on parts 1 through 4. So let's get started. So in part 1, you're given multiplication problems that have a missing number. So in order to solve for that missing number, what you have to do is change the multiplication problem into a division problem. Once you've changed it into a division problem, then you can solve for that missing number. So let's do part A as an example. We have the multiplication problem. 4 multiplied by a number gives us 812. So in order to find this missing number, what we first have to do is change this multiplication problem into a division problem. Right, so we remember that the number that comes after the equal sign is always going to go underneath our division problem. So this 812 will go inside of our division sign. Then this 4 will go in front. And then just like we've been practicing, we're going to divide. So I'm going to start with my first number, right? We know that 4 can divide into 8. How many times? If we skip count by 4, 4, 8, 2 times. So 2 will go on top. Next, I'm going to look at the next number, which is the 1. I know that 4 can't go into 1, so I'll look at the next number as well, 12. I know that 4 can divide into 12. How many times? So we can skip count or use our multiplication chart to help us. 4, 8, 12, 3 times. But I can't just write 3. Remember, since the 12 has 2 digits, my answer that goes on top also has to have 2 digits. So instead of writing 3, I'm going to write 0, 3. So our answer is 203. So now that we solved for that division problem, I can enter in that missing number in my multiplication problem. 203. Right, so we now know that 4 multiplied by 203 gives us 812. So now what I want you guys to do is for parts B and C to follow the same steps. Once again, you have a multiplication problem with a missing number. You're going to first have to change it into a division problem, solve, and then you'll get your missing number. So you can pause the video now, and then I'll see you guys in part 2. So welcome back to part 2. In part 2, once again, we're going to be practicing our equivalent fractions. So I'll read what it says in our book. Write the complete fraction for the pictures. Remember, show the two fractions. Then show the fraction that you multiply by to get the second fraction. So I'm going to quickly, for part A, draw the fractions that we are given. So all we're doing in part 2, guys, is showing that these two fractions are equivalent, or that they are equal to one another. So we want to show that the part that is shaded in each fraction is the same. Let me just finish this. So we have this. Perfect. So this is for part A. These are our fractions, right? So this is our first fraction, and this is our second fraction. So what you guys have for part A, underneath or right on the side, is this. You have blank times blank equals blank. So what we want to do in our first blank is write the fraction for the first image. Right, so for this image, the fraction will go over here. So remember, the top number will be how many parts are shaded. Right, so if you look at our first fraction, there are 1, 2, 3 parts that are shaded. So 3 will be our top number. Our bottom number will be how many parts are in 1 unit. I'll use a different color here to show you that this is 1 unit, and this is 1 unit as well. So we can count that there are 1, 2 parts in 1 unit. So 2 will be the bottom number in my fraction. So the fraction for the first image will be 3 over 2. We'll leave this next blank, we'll leave it alone, and then we'll go to this last blank that comes after the equal sign. So what we want to write for this one is the fraction for our second image in part A. So once again, our top number will be how many parts are shaded. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 parts are shaded. Remember, the parts that are shaded will be our top number, so I'm going to put a 9 right over here. My bottom number will be how many parts are in 1 unit. Remember, each one of these rectangles is 1 unit. So all I have to do is count how many spots there are in this 1 unit. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 will be my bottom number in this fraction. So once again, what we've done so far is in my first blank, I wrote the fraction for the first set of images. And then in my second blank, I wrote the fraction for the second set of images in part A. What we want to do for this second column is figure out what we're multiplying by to get, what we're multiplying the first fraction by to get the second fraction. Right, so we want to figure out 3 multiplied by what number will give me 9, and 2 multiplied by what number will give me 6. Just as a hint, both your top and bottom number should be the same number. If they're not, that means we have to look back and try again. Right, we want them to be the same number because we know that these fractions are equivalent. So 3 multiplied by what number will give me 9? If I skip count by 3s, 3, 6, 9, it'll be 3. And then for our second number, 2 multiplied by what number gives me 6? Right, 2, 4, 6, it's also 3. So since both of my top and my bottom numbers are the same, that means we did this correctly, and we've shown that these two fractions are equivalent. So what I want you guys to do now is to use the images in part B and to follow the same rules. In your first blank, you'll write the fraction for the first image. In your last blank, you'll write the fraction for the last image, and then you'll figure out what you multiplied your first fraction by to get your second fraction. And once again, both of your numbers should be the same. So you can pause the video now, and then I'll see you guys in part 3. So in part 3, once again, we're looking at equivalent fractions. So I'm going to erase this, and then I'll read what it says in our book. Let me find it over here. So these are equations that show a pair of equivalent fractions. The sample problem is 3/4 equals 624 over 832. So if you look on your sheet, I've added that example problem. So we'll go over that problem together. So these fractions are equivalent. So you multiply 3/4 by a fraction that equals to 1 to get the other fraction. So you work this problem just like you would work other problems. So I'll go over the steps that we follow for our example. So we have the fraction 3 over 4, and we're told that it equals 624 over 832. Just like that. So what we want to do now is figure out what you have to multiply by to get this fraction to get to this fraction. Right? So if you look at the second spot on your sheet, we notice that we're multiplying by a number. So I'm going to erase this and add in an extra blank. 32. Right? So we know that these fractions are equivalent, right? So I have to multiply 3/4 by a number that equals to 1, which will give me this equivalent fraction. So all we have to do now is figure out what this top and bottom number will be. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to use division. So first, I'm going to have to find out what 624 divided by 3 gives me, and then what 832 divided by 4 gives me. And that will give me my missing fraction. right? So if we look at our top one, we have 624, and we're dividing it by 3. Right, so all I have to do now is just simple division. 3 divides into 6 2 times, and then we know that 3 divides into 24 how many times? 8, but since there's 2 digits, I have to put a 0, 8. So my top answer is 208. And then I have to do the same with 832 and divide it by 4. So if I do that as well, I'm going to change it into a division problem, and then I'll get the same answer, which is 208. So our fraction then is, we know that 3 over 4 multiplied by 208 over 208 gives us the second fraction, which is 624 over 832. So let's look at example 1 together. In example 1, we have the fraction 2 over 5 multiplied by a fraction, which we have to figure out, and we know that it'll give us 122 over 305, right? So these are what we have to fill in. 2/5 will go into our first blank. 122 over 305 will go into our last blank. Sorry, I need to have my equal sign here. So just like we did in part 2, we have to figure out what number we're multiplying the two fractions by. So I have to figure out what am I multiplying 2/5 by to get to 122 over 305. So just like we did in our example problem, I'm going to change this into a division problem, and then I'm going to change this also into a division problem. So here I'm going to divide 2 into 122. Right, so I know that 2 can't go into 1, but it can go into 12. How many times? 6. And then I know 2 can divide into 2 one time. So my top number will be 61. And then for my bottom number, I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to divide 5 into 305. I know that 5 can't go into 3, but it can go into 30 6 times. And then I know 5 can go into 5 one time as well. So my fraction is 61 over 61. I know this is correct because both my top number and my bottom number are the same number. Remember, they have to be the same number in order for these two fractions to be equivalent. So using what we did here, I want you guys to now try to do parts B and C on your own. So remember, in the first blank, you're going to put in the first fraction. In the last blank, you're going to put in the number that came after the equal sign. In that middle blank, all we have to do is divide the last number by the first number. And then the same with the last bottom number with the first bottom number. And that will give you our middle fraction. So you can pause the video now, and then I'll see you in part 4. So welcome back to part 4. So in part 4, we're going to be looking at our coordinate system. So we're going to be given a coordinate grid. So we have 2 different axes. So this is what you guys have, right? So we have our x-axis, which is going to be on the bottom. So this is our x-axis, and then the axis that goes up will be our y-axis. So I'll read what it says. So you're going to find points on a coordinate grid. Each item tells what x equals and what y equals on our grid. You're going to write the letters shown on the grid for each item. Remember, like I just mentioned, the x arrow is along the bottom and the y arrow goes up. So for part A, B, C, and D, we're given various coordinates. So we're given what x equals and what y equals. So what you guys have to do is find out what letter each of those coordinates equals. So in part A, we have x equals 6 and y equals 10. So what we always have to do is we're going to start with our x-axis. Right, so we have 0 here. So what you guys have to do for part A is find where there is a 6 on the x-axis. So you're going to go, right, there's 1, 2, you have them labeled on yours, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to focus on here, right? This is our x-axis, but we're not done yet. We know that our y-axis is going to equal 10, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 is here, right? So we want to find where x equals 6 and where y equals 10, right? So it will be right over here. So at this point is where we have a letter written. So if you look where x equals 6 and where y equals 10, we have the letter J. So that's the letter we're going to write in for part A. For part B, once again, what we're going to do is first look at our x-axis. X equals 4. So you're going to look at where the 4 is on your x-axis. Then you're going to look at your y-axis. Your y-axis tells us that y equals 9. So you're going to climb up 9, just right here, and then your x equals 4, and then you'll match them together. And if we look, we have the letter G. So that's what we'll write for number B. So now what I want you guys to do is for parts C and D, use the coordinate grid, use the coordinates you're given, and find the missing letters. So once again, first you're going to look at your x-axis, and then you're going to look at your y-axis. Keep up the awesome work, and I'll see you guys in our next lesson. Bye!